hello, Cookies here. This is a +15 tyrannical, inspiring, necrotic, prideful Theater of Pain that I did. Sorry, I was collecting my thoughts. This is a pickup group except for the hunter. He's in my guild, and besides this, we did a 13 necrotic wake first, and then we +2'd that into this Theater of Pain and decided to run with the same group of people. We weren't in voice or anything. And yeah, I just wanted to go through the VOD and talk about how I played it. I'm a 205 eye level resto shaman. This is one of my alt characters, so it was a pretty big key to do on an alt. And then you can see my talent setup, my my enchants, my gear and all that stuff. I'm using the Riptide legendary, and I'm a Necrolord. And yeah, we'll just go through this and look at the dungeon. So not too much to talk about with the talents. I think multiple talents work just fine with Resto Shaman. This is just my setup. So if you have any questions about the talents or anything, feel free to just let me know in the comments or DM me on Discord. But we'll just jump right into this. So the first pull is not anything really to talk about in this dungeon. You kind of just kill the pack, make sure you purge the debuff off of the contenders, which I'm not doing. And then we just need someone to soothe the tantrums when they're in the group, so we'll just go ahead and skip over to the first boss here. And this first boss on Necrotic Week, you're going to want to focus Decia, and that's because the tank will get a reset on their necrotic stacks when she hits about 30% HP, just because she goes into a bunch of cast sequences and it causes the necrotic stacks to just fall off by default. But really all we're doing here, the name of the game is really help do as much damage as possible. You can see I'm putting Flame Shock on multiple targets if I can. I'm like here, I put it on 2 targets, and then I'm just putting all my Lava Burst and my Chain Lightnings or Lightning Bolts into our main target, Decia. And really just every time, like even here I'm making a mistake, every time I have a Lava Surge proc, I should just instantly be eating it if I can, as long as the tank isn't going to die instantly. And then obviously the tank's going to keep gaining more and more stacks, so we're going to try to hold off on using any cooldowns as long as we can. We know that they're a Kyrian and they have Bubble Taunt, so they can reset their stacks multiple times without us having to intervene with like a Spirit Link or Ascendance or anything. So I'm going to try to hold my cooldowns as much as possible. And then the other really important thing about this fight is managing your mana. Especially as a Resto Shaman, it's easy to just forget about your mana and just spam healing surges into the tank to keep them up. And then before you know it, you have 1 boss dead and there's still 2 alive with half HP and you're out of mana completely. So try to utilize things like Healing Wave, try to utilize Riptide, try to utilize, your Covenant ability. Utilize these things, and also I'm using Cloudburst Totem on cooldown, and this is what helps kind of keep the tank up while I just put Riptides into the group. And I don't have to do, it does like a lot of passive healing for me. And then I'm using Healing Surge when I feel that it's necessary to pick somebody up. And then besides that, that's really the boss. Once you get Decia down, the rest of the fight is very simple. And another thing I should be doing a lot more throughout this fight is in helping interrupt the ads, because it'll just reduce the overall damage we take, obviously, in the dungeon, or in the boss fight, rather. Yeah, the rest is pretty straightforward, so I'll go ahead and skip ahead. Another thing to mention real quick is those debuffs that you keep seeing pop up on my plater. Those need to be purged. So Thel will randomly buff the other bosses, and you just need to make sure that you are purging them, because it will heal them if they have that buff on them for too long. Okay, so we'll go ahead and skip on down here and see what we end up doing next. We just do 1 pull here. One thing worth mentioning with these Withering Discharges, like here you can see that we can't interrupt that one, so we all get the Withering Discharge, which is a huge time loss in a dungeon. So what you can actually do to avoid that is the tank could tank it back here where it normally is, and then you can actually LOS the Sludge Spear when it starts casting that. And then we're just doing that pack and then going to the next room over here. These ads, again, pretty straightforward. Try to utilize things like stuns on them to break them out of all these like Bind Soul casts, but unfortunately they have an Inspiring here, so I'm just healing through it. I drop down my Ascendance, I put Riptide on everybody, and I'm just kind of spamming Healing Surges and Riptides and Healing Waves with my Necrolord ability into the group. And then I'm not going to pick up this banner until after this mob dies, and that's just because we want the buff for as long as possible so that it has a chance to go into the boss, or better yet, it'll go through the trash that actually matters and it's more difficult, because these pulls are typically pretty easy. So we'll just skip through this just a little bit. And again, pretty standard pull. We have Prideful here, and Prideful on a 15 isn't too bad, especially on Tyrannical week. I don't actually think that Prideful scales off of Tyrannical or Fortified, but just the fact that we're not having to deal with trash as much makes Prideful like significantly easier, because I'm not having to use cooldowns on trash. So really all I'm doing is just saving a cooldown for a Prideful, and even here, like as my Shaman, I don't really need a cooldown for Prideful. I can just heal through it, because Shamans are pretty crazy. But as a general rule, try to save cooldowns for, on Tyrannical weeks, you save cooldown, any healing cooldown for Prideful, just one healing cooldown for every Prideful, and then have all your cooldowns available for a boss. And then on Fortified weeks, you do the exact opposite. You make sure that you have one cooldown available for Prideful, and then you should just be using the rest of your healing cooldowns non-stop when they're available if you feel like you need them on a trash pull. And we'll skip through most of this. Most of these pulls are just going to be us interrupting things and making sure that we are keeping the group topped off. This is the only really like nasty pull. And so I believe we end up just nuking down the Magus so that we can interrupt the Soulbinder. Here we get a bunch of dispellable debuffs out in the group. We're going to Spirit Link for the Soulstorm that comes out. And we should essentially be dispelling people on cooldown. Usually the person has the longest duration dot on them, so like here I should probably dispel the monk or myself. Especially because now he has a curse, which, there we get it off. And then it's really just dispelling as much as you can, and then again just making sure that you have a healing cooldown up for this pack especially. It's just it can be a really brutal pack. And then the next follow-up packs are really simple. You just dodge the tornadoes and interrupt as much as possible. And then we'll go to this pack, and this is where we could use like a little cooldown because we're gonna get Prideful here anyway. So if we use a cooldown, you know, like if I were to pop Ascendance here right now, then I would have it back up for the boss fight when I actually end up needing it. So it's kind of a free way to use Ascendance. So here I use it just to keep the group topped off. I'm going to keep Riptide out, and that's all you're really doing on Shaman nowadays, in Mythic Plus especially, is like just keep Riptide on as many players as possible. Keep using Cloudburst on cooldown, which you can see I'm not doing here. I should be dropping a Cloudburst. And then just help your group by interrupting, dealing damage, and just generally, you know, dispelling debuffs and stuff like that. And Riptides will kind of carry you through, and Cloudburst will carry you through a lot of the incoming damage. Then we have Prideful on the platform, and we'll go ahead and skip this because there's not too much to it. Now this boss is probably, I would consider this boss to probably be the hardest boss in Theater of Pain, but it really just depends on your group setup. But essentially you're going to get these phantasmal parasites that go on people. It'll go on 2 players every time, and you need to dispel 1 player, and then the other player needs to use a defensive like every single time. If you don't use a defensive, you are probably going to die. So it's very important that you dispel somebody instantly, so you just have to make your best judgment. I try to go based off of, you know, who I feel like I can heal the most or who has cooldowns available. So here I get targeted again and the Hunter gets targeted. I dispel the Hunter because I trust myself to heal myself more. I think I actually have the Healing Surge conduit to where Healing Surge does like, it's like 20% more effective on myself. So it makes it really easy to just heal that debuff off myself even without cooldowns. And this is another fight, especially on Tyrannical when you get to these higher keys. It's very important to understand that your mana is a very important resource. So using it wisely is what's going to get you through the key or not. Running out of mana during a boss fight is like the worst thing ever, but luckily we have a lot of Pridefuls going into these bosses, so it's pretty easy. Like right now you can see I'm at like 70% mana and the boss is below half HP, so we still do have to be careful though, because things can go wrong very quickly. Especially as people start running lower and lower on defensive abilities and stuff like that. And we run out of healing cooldowns. And here the Hunter gets a really nasty overlap. He pops a defensive. I heal him up. He gets laid on hands. And I also dispelled him because he probably would have died right there with that overlap had I not dispelled him. So you can see here, I was about to dispel the mage. But I see that the Hunter gets it. So he gets the Rip Soul debuff here first. And then he's going to immediately get the Parasite right during this, like right as this cast finishes. So he's stunned in here, he's taking damage. I'm about to dispel the mage, and then I switch down here really quickly and dispel him because I know he's in more danger since he got both debuffs. And if you get both overlapping debuffs and you don't have a way to immune it instantly, you are definitely going to die. Like, even then, I needed to dispel faster. If this was like a 16 or 17, he probably, I mean, he definitely would have died right there from that overlap. And then here again, we're just healing. I'm gonna just drop my Spirit Link because I feel like it's a safe time to use it. We have the Parasites, we dispel the Hunter again, because the Monk can actually use Diffuse Magic right there and remove his debuff. He just does it a little bit late. Then we have the Draw Souls again. And we're just making sure that our group is topped off for each of these Draw Souls, and then each of the Parasites we just dispel one person instantly, and then just really put our attention into the other player who has the debuff. And here we're going to go ahead and dispel the Paladin because I see that the Monk uses his defensive. And here he gets a nasty overlap, so I'm going to make sure that he's nice and topped off. I'm going to keep healing him. And then we can switch over and drop a Riptide on somebody else. And there we go, boss dead. And we can move on. And with that out of the way, that gives us a nice little boost of confidence going into here. And now the only thing that I'll mention about these packs is these Putrid Belchers. Actually, we actually end up going to PvP, so I'll wait until I talk about that. So we go to the PvP boss. Nothing to really talk about in this pack. This guy's just a tank buster, so make sure the tank is nice and healthy for every Savage Flurry. And if you want, you can kind of run ahead over here and start the RP here, because these two guys have to like fight to figure out who's active. And then I also tag him and just bring him into the room. And I think you're gonna see me say like ink in chat, INC, as in, you know, hey, there's a mob coming, so just be careful. So there, I let the tank know, hey, I pulled the other mob, it's on its way, and then we can pull that. Just to kind of help speed things up a tiny bit. It really doesn't speed it up that much, but it adds a little bit of time that can, you know, make or break the key. But you also can get tanks that get kind of upset about this stuff, so you just have to be cautious if you're going to pull ahead and do things like that for your tank. Get Prideful here, go down the stairs. And with Prideful, it's the same thing. We're dropping Cloudburst on cooldown. We're keeping Riptide out on as many players as possible, just using it non-stop with our Covenant ability and our regular cooldown of Riptide. And then we're essentially filling the gaps with Healing Surge, Chain Heal, Healing Wave, Healing Rain, things like that, to let Cloudburst really build up into these like really beefy heals. And then this pack is also very rough. You want to try to stun everything if it's away from the Inspiring guy. But if you pull it with the Inspiring guy, I definitely recommend using cooldowns here, even on a Tyrannical key. So you see I drop Spear Link because we're just all getting chunked down, and that's because these different mobs, they all just random target players in the party and just do a bunch of single target damage to them. They just keep randomly shooting people and stuff, so you want to make sure that your group is nice and topped off constantly for that. This lady hits pretty hard, so the Seismic Stomp will do like a little AoE group damage, and then these ricocheting blades will just hit the player that she throws it at pretty hard. Pretty sure this got nerfed, but maybe it's just because it's not fortified. But on fortified, I mean, this mob right here is harder than some of the bosses, so just be very wary on fortified keys to this mob here. And if you get ricocheting blade, you just pop a defensive and it won't hit you nearly as hard. Then we have Prideful, and we go into the boss with this Prideful. Now, this boss, the major healing mechanic is definitely going to be, for one, the Tank Buster hit, which is the Brutal Combo. You're going to want to make sure your tank's nice and topped off for that, and you're just watching his HP in case it dips at all. And then after every Brutal Combo, he will jump into the middle of the room here. So he does Brutal Combo, he'll spawn a banner. It's not always in the same order. And then he's going to jump into the middle of the room here. It's going to do a large burst of damage to the entire group. You can see there it gets some people below half HP, so you really need to make sure everyone is topped off before he jumps in the middle of the room. And then he's going to do just these various hits across the group. The only one that is really important that you don't just need to dodge is the circle around him, the interrupting, I think it's like interrupting roar or something like that. You just want to make sure you're out of the circle towards the edge, and then that you're also not casting any spells when he finishes his own cast. Here I'm helping kill the banner. I keep Flame Shock up on the boss and the banner just to get extra procs. Again, Tyrannical is all about just a battle of attrition, so doing damage where you can is very, very important, especially this early on in the expansion. But we don't let damage ever override our ability to heal or our, thought process on healing. Healing should definitely be the priority. Other than this, the boss is pretty straightforward. We're going to do one more little section of PvP, and then we're going to lust with our cooldowns just to get it used. Since we still have another whole quarter to go, we're helping with the banner yet again. He jumps in the middle of the room here. Make sure the group's nice and topped off. We start throwing out our Riptides. We throw out our Covenant ability. Now everyone has a Riptide, so we get this nice healing wave in if I press it, which I may end up not actually pressing it. Nope, I don't end up pressing healing wave. That's okay. There, I should have definitely pressed healing wave though, because it would have done the same thing as like the healing surge, healing rain combo, just a lot faster. Help with banner, so on and so forth. We repeat, and the fight's over. And then we go over to Gorechop, and again, the thing I wanted to talk about, you can LOS the blighted sludge spewers. You can LOS them when they're casting behind these walls or back here a little further. And then these putrid belchers, if you have access to stuns or shackle undead from a priest, you want to stun him every time, or crowd control him every time he does the devour flesh cast, I believe it's called. Chop will just do some, yeah, it's this devour flesh cast. So if that successfully goes off without being stunned, he'll just gain a large portion of his health back. He'll gain like 20% HP or something back, so it just makes the mob take a lot longer to kill. I'm gonna skip this. And let me pull this next pack. I try to LOS that Withering Discharge, but unfortunately I don't make it, so we're just gonna heal through it. Puts a big dampen on our timer, but that's alright. This guy does like pulsing AoE damage to the entire group, so we just want to make sure that we are keeping the group nice and healthy. Again, just treating it like a Prideful, just keeping Riptide on everyone. This is like the way of AoE healing, is we keep Riptide on everyone, fill the gaps with Healing Wave and Healing Surge, and then just keep Riptiding on cooldown and press Cloudburst and have a Cloudburst down and ready to either, you know, let go or press. And typically the rule with Cloudburst is you press Cloudburst whenever someone is going to die, but if no one's going to die, you just let Cloudburst sit there and do its full healing once it's, you know, stocked up a bunch of healing over 15 seconds, because there's no real reason to press it if no one's going to die. You might as well just do more healing with it, even if it, you know, ends up overhealing. It's still generally more worth it, because if no one's going to die, then you don't need the healing, essentially. And then Gorechop here. Gorechop's actually a pretty tough boss. He just has a lot of HP, so this is going to be another boss where, again, you're going to want to keep Flame Shock up, keep Lava Bursting. But the main thing is just keeping your tank nice and healthy for these. This is why I use Spirit Link Gears, because I realize that I'm behind and I don't want to risk it. Because those Hateful Strikes right there hurt a lot. So if your tank doesn't have mitigation or isn't full HP, they're probably going to get one shot in most keys for the Hateful Strikes. So we just want to be very wary of that. Like right there, it does like a good, like almost 60% of the tank's health. It is absolutely brutal. Not to mention that he's also gaining like necrotic stacks, and we're having to dodge hooks, and we have ads spawning and dealing damage to people. And the ads are actually dodgeable. They jump to random players that are in range and will do this little swiping attack, but if you move while they jump to you, you can actually just completely avoid them. So like here, when they're jumping to me, I could just be like sidestepping them and not getting hit by their little jump attack. Our monk gets hit by the wall, so we're just going to make sure he's nice and topped off. We're going to pop Ascendance here just to be safe, because the tank is also taking a lot of damage, and the boss is under 50% HP, so I'm confident that I can use a healing cooldown. And that's the other thing about M+, is like, don't hesitate to use your cooldowns. It's just more about, as you get into higher keys, you really have to start thinking, okay, where do I need this cooldown? Because if I don't need it, I shouldn't be necessarily pressing it unless it gives me some kind of like damage upgrade, like a Holy Paladin or something. And this is where I noticed that my mana is pretty nice looking at the moment compared to the boss HP. That should be the way that you check like how your mana is doing, is you just compare your mana percentage to the boss's health percentage, and you know, technically if they're even, then In Mythic Plus, you're probably falling behind, so you want your mana a decent amount ahead of the boss's HP. But here I could be spamming way more healing surges, for instance. That's what I'm going to start doing. And then I'm not using unbuffed. This is my little Tidal Waves tracker right here, this little blue number that pops up every time I use Riptide. We do not want to be pressing Healing Surge or Healing Wave without Tidal Waves. Otherwise it's just more efficient to press Healing Rain or Chain Heal. Boss dies, we grab the banner after this boss so that we have it for the last one, because the last one's rough. And last boss, we aren't going to Lust on Pull. We don't have a Prideful, unfortunately, so this is going to be a long fight. And the main things to watch out for on this fight is the Grasping Rift when comboed with the ad spawns. It doesn't do very much damage unless it's comboed with the ads. So when these ads spawn, they're going to do a burst of damage to the whole group and then immediately cast these Death Bolts. And these Death Bolts, if they're not immediately interrupted, they will absolutely tear apart your group. So that's why I just drop Spirit Link early. I drop a Cloudburst again, and I'm just keeping, Riptide going on everybody, keeping Healing Rain down, making sure that we're getting full utilization out of this Cloudburst that's building up. And then the only other important thing in Phase 1 is actually when it switches to Phase 2, the boss will do a burst of group-wide damage as she transitions into the phase. You can see right there. There's the damage right there that goes through on the group. So you just want to make sure your group's topped off when you're going into the second phase, and then also that you are topping them off once again once they take damage, or having them use damage reduction, or that would be a good time for things like Spirit Link, Healing Tide, Ascendance even, stuff like that. Here we're just dodging stuff. And the goal here should always be keep your group alive, but keep yourself alive. There's a lot of people who don't tend to pay attention to stuff happening, and it gets them into really bad shit. And here we're looking to interrupt one of the Deathwalkers, so I interrupt that far one. I watch out for the charges and the frontal. And then we got swirlies on the floor. And we watch out for the charges. Again, I'm mostly just focused on the charges. I could be doing damage to the boss here, but I just really want to make sure that there's nothing that's going to randomly, screw over the key, because technically, as long as I have mana, we can keep going for a while. You're respawning ads again, but boss dies, and that's the key. So that's the 0 death, 15 theater pain as the Resto Shaman, 205 eye level. Hopefully this video is useful, and I hope that it helps you push some keys. And besides that, thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you stop by the Discord, make sure you stop by the stream, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching.